26 years old, and Margaret Calloway stood in the mud outside the Larkspur Hollow mercantile with everything she owned wrapped in a shawl that had once belonged to her mother. Her uncle, Thaddeus Vane, the man who had taken her in after her father vanished 11 years before, had put her out that very morning, telling the whole boarding house that she was a grown woman now and no longer his burden to feed. He said it plainly, without cruelty in his voice, which somehow made it crueler still. In her pocket she carried $8.40, every bit of it earned from mending shirts and hemming skirts for women who paid her in coin because they pitied her more than they respected her. That same week, the county was auctioning off an old, boarded-up building at the end of Cutbank Street, the abandoned watchmaker's shop that had sat empty and unclaimed since the day her father disappeared without a word to anyone, the building the whole town had learned to walk past without looking at. Nobody bid on it. Nobody wanted it. So when the auctioneer's gavel came down, Margaret Calloway, orphaned in all but name, paid $6 for a ruin nobody else would touch, never dreaming that sealed behind its counter was a secret that would restore not only her name, but the truth of an entire town. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Margaret Calloway. If you have ever felt like the thing everyone else discarded, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Margaret had been born in that shop, or near enough to it that the story had become family legend. Her mother used to say that the midwife arrived to the sound of 100 clocks ticking in unison, as if time itself had paused to mark the moment. Her father, Elias Calloway, was the finest watchmaker between Cheyenne and the Black Hills, a broad-shouldered, soft-spoken man whose hands were somehow both strong enough to shoe a horse and delicate enough to set a hairspring no thicker than a. What she found in the space behind that false wall was not gold, not at first glance, though gold would come to matter a great deal before her story was through. It was a strong box, small and iron-cornered, exactly the sort of box a cooperative of cattlemen might have used to hold their shared savings, and beside it, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from damp, a leather-bound ledger, and beneath that, folded with the particular care Margaret recognized from every letter her father had ever written her, a single sealed envelope with her name upon it in his unmistakable hand. For my Margaret, when she is old enough to understand. She did not open the envelope that first night. She sat instead on the dusty floor of her father's shop with the lamp guttering low, the strongbox and ledger before her, and she wept in a way she had not allowed herself to weep in 11 years, because whatever these things meant, they meant that her father had not simply vanished into the hills and abandoned her to shame. He had left something behind, deliberately, carefully, the way he built every mechanism he ever touched, and a man who builds a hiding place with that much care is not a man fleeing his responsibilities, but a man protecting something he could not yet explain. It took her 3 more days to work up the courage to open the ledger, and when she did, sitting at the very workbench where her father had once taught her to read a movement, she began to understand the shape of what had truly happened 11 years before. The ledger was not the cooperative's official book. That book, she would later learn, had been altered and falsified by another hand entirely, but a second, private accounting her father had kept in secret, page after page in his careful script, tracking discrepancies between what the ranching families had contributed to their cooperative fund and what the official ledger, kept by the cooperative's appointed treasurer, claimed had been deposited. Slowly, method. The conflict that followed was quieter than Margaret might have imagined, and in some ways harder to bear, because it was fought not with confrontation but with the slow, patient unspooling of Larkspur Hollow's trust. Thaddeus, sensing the ground shifting beneath him, began quietly discouraging the ranching families from entertaining what he called his niece's grief-addled fancies, reminding them of old debts and old favors, working the same rooms he had always worked. There were nights Margaret sat alone in the shop, the lamp burning low over the ledger and the letter and the strongbox's true contents, and wondered whether 11 years of a town's certainty could ever truly be undone by a woman with no standing left to lose. But she thought, in those long nights, of her father's hands guiding hers over a watch's inner workings, of his voice telling her that a well-built thing, tended with patience, would keep faith in the end, and she understood that she was not merely trying to clear a name, but to finish a mechanism her father had begun building the moment he hid that strongbox behind a false wall, trusting that someday, someone patient enough would find it and set it turning again. The turning point came at the cooperative's regular spring meeting, held that year in the Larkspur Hollow schoolhouse with nearly every founding family present, called ostensibly to discuss the long-delayed railroad spur but attended, everyone quietly understood, because word of Margaret's discoveries had spread too far to be ignored any longer. Thaddeus stood before the gathered ranchers as he always had, prepared to dismiss the whole matter as a grieving woman's confusion, but Margaret rose before he could speak, laid her father's ledger and the cooperative's original founding contract upon the schoolhouse table, and asked Silas Rout, seated in the front row with his cane across his knees, to confirm before everyone present whether the figures in her father's private accounting